Story 1. M. Owens. My brother Johnny and I were staying at a cabin in the mountains of northern Montana. It was nestled in a low-lying area, tucked away among the trees. We're both very outdoorsy, so this was a typical trip for us, hanging out in the woods, going for hikes, and just exploring. Because of the long drive, we took it easy the first day, staying near the cabin and enjoying the scenery. Around 5:30 p.m., Johnny decided to go for a short walk before dark. I didn't think much of it, just nodded and said, "All right." He didn't take a backpack or anything, so I knew it would be brief. I stretched out on the couch near the fireplace, barely awake, still exhausted from doing most of the driving earlier. The cabin slowly grew darker as the sun dropped behind the mountains. It wasn't until the only light left was the fireplace that I realized Johnny hadn't returned. It was clearly too dark to be walking around without any gear. I jumped up, grabbed my day bag, a headlamp, and a flashlight, then headed out to make sure he was okay. My first thought was that we were in bear country, and I was nervous about Johnny possibly running into one. However, as I went deeper into the woods along the path, my anxiety shifted to a different possibility. I kept getting a bad feeling, which made me look over my shoulder several times as if expecting someone to be there. I never saw anything, though. Just 10 minutes down the trail, I saw Johnny coming toward me. He looked uneasy. He wasn't running, but he was moving fairly quickly, like he was trying to get away from something. We both started talking at the same time. I was trying to ask what was going on, and he was trying to tell me to turn back and get to the cabin. Eventually, we both just fast walked back. Once inside, he told me he had seen someone watching him from the trees. He said the guy looked really creepy, and as he kept walking, the man seemed to be stalking him. Johnny thought if he walked back to the cabin in daylight, the guy might have followed him, so he waited until dark. Probably because he was the older brother, Johnny assured me it was likely nothing, and he was just trying to be safe. I trusted him and tried not to worry. The guy he saw probably just had a cabin nearby or was on a hike. We made dinner, then sat out on the front porch next to a campfire for the rest of the night. I think both of us were unconsciously trying to keep watch for anyone, but neither of us admitted it. The mountains grew quieter as the night wore on. We talked by the campfire well into the night, eventually going inside and sleeping until morning. After a quick breakfast, we packed our bags and left for the main hike in the area, going up to a mountain peak. It took around 6 hours. We were both completely drained afterward. The last hour of walking back to the cabin felt like a drag. Heading in, Johnny tossed his bag down and said he was going to take a shower. I waited on the couch. The cabin only had 2 rooms and 1 bathroom, so I had to wait my turn. I'd been lying there for only a minute when I randomly remembered the guy my brother had talked about yesterday. I got up and looked out the windows, almost expecting to see him out there. I went back to the couch, but I suddenly felt strange. A few more minutes went by as I tried to figure out what I was feeling when I noticed that the loud sound of the water pump for the shower hadn't started yet. "Johnny?" No response. I got up and walked down the hall toward the bedroom. I knocked on the door and called his name again, but I felt something unsettling as I reached down and cracked the door open. I opened it slowly, maybe just a few inches, and could see Johnny through the gap. He was kneeling in the corner of the room, eyes wide open and staring at me, subtly shaking his head no, clearly telling me to go away. The fear in his eyes was so unnerving, it still burned into my memory, a horrifying sight I wish I never have to see again. I pushed the door fully open, seeing a man standing just a few feet from him. He also had wide eyes, but in a tired, disturbing way. He wore disheveled, torn-up clothes and had oily, long black hair. In that moment, I didn't have time to think. It was just my instant raw reaction to stop him. I charged at him, and only once I was a couple of steps away, I saw him raise a gun from his side. I tackled him, and Johnny immediately knew what to do. We wrestled the gun away from him and got him mostly under control. I swear this guy was feral, screaming and screeching and clawing to try to get away. I'd never seen anything like it. He wasn't letting up, so it took a while to figure out exactly how to escape. We decided Johnny, who was much bigger than I was, would hold him down while I got the car ready. I did as he said, quickly tossing our bags into the car. They were already packed from our hike. Then I turned the car on. I went back in, and we tried to tie him up with anything we could find, just enough to let us get away. And obviously we took the gun with us. We could hear him screaming from inside the cabin as we drove away. Once we were in service, we notified the police, but by the time they made it to the cabin, the restraints we'd used were scattered across the floor, and the man was nowhere to be found. My brother said when he went into the room to shower, he was caught completely off guard and held at gunpoint. He was told to call me into the room. My brother refused, knowing he'd be giving me no chance if he did, but then I walked in anyway. We still talk about how crazy it was that I tackled the guy. Honestly, I can't even explain it, but it might have been what got us out of that cabin alive. The only clue the authorities have to who the guy was came from the gun we gave them. They traced it to a man who'd been missing for 5 years from somewhere about 50 miles away from where we were. However, the description we gave them of our attacker suggested it was probably someone else, which leads us to believe that whoever attacked us had also attacked the owner of the firearm, ultimately leaving him as a missing person. So assuming things had gone any differently, that could have been mine and Johnny's fate as well.
Story 2. PL. In 2016, I took a trip down to my father's old cabin. It was a 6-hour drive into the woods outside the hometown he grew up in. That town was no longer a town, just an abandoned row of old buildings along a deserted road. We had never really gone to his cabin because he said there wasn't much reason to once the town was gone. But after he passed away, I figured it would be nice to visit the home he once built. I knew it would be in bad shape, and I wanted to do some basic restorations just to keep it standing and preserve it for as long as possible. If nothing else, I hoped the trip would clear my mind and give me some peace and quiet. I drove there, arriving at the town and parking my car behind one of the abandoned gas station buildings. Then I walked the thin, rugged trail for 2 miles up to the cabin. I had all my backpacking gear and brought the tools I needed. Part of me knew it might have already collapsed, so I was prepared to camp in a tent if necessary. Luckily, after making the long trek, I found the cabin still standing. It was in a small clearing, a basic rectangular log cabin with vines and greenery growing up the outer walls. When I walked in, I noticed there were no locks on the door and the interior was in terrible shape. Trash was scattered everywhere, and a musty, unpleasant smell filled the room. It was clear that at some point someone realized the place wasn't in use and probably had stayed there, maybe for a while, although it didn't seem recent. No signs of anything being there for a couple of years or so. I moved what I could into the corner, making a flat space for my gear. With the sun already setting, I unrolled my sleeping bag and settled in. I should mention that although I didn't hear or see anything that night, I couldn't sleep for more than 30 minutes at a time before waking up with a strange, disturbing feeling. It made for a very bad night. I got up at sunrise groggy and wondering if the whole trip was a mistake. I used my camping stove to brew coffee, then took a walk through the woods to clear my head. It was still kind of dark, with the sun barely peeking through the trees. A little ways in, I found an overlook, a small hill where I could see above the tree line. I thought it'd be a great place to watch the sunrise. But I found something else. I could see the abandoned town from up there. It was very far away, but there was a light. It looked like it was coming from a window in one of the buildings. I couldn't tell the distance if it was a house or a store. A minute later, it suddenly turned off. It made me worry a bit about my car, but mostly I was just surprised anyone else was around here. Likely it was just some urban explorers checking out the town, nothing to worry about. Still, it was a big coincidence. I sat on the hill for an hour watching the sun come up, then walked back to the cabin to start working. The first thing was to reseal and clean up the outside. The whole time I was working out there, though, I kept getting that same feeling I had during the night. Every time I looked back at the woods, an eerie sense loomed over me. It took me a bit to understand what I felt, but eventually I grasped what I think it was. I felt like I wasn't alone. I kept working, but constantly looked over my shoulder. The possibility of anyone else being out here was genuinely impossible. The abandoned town, sure, but here, in random woods with nothing but a decaying cabin? I thought I must have been on edge for reasons beyond me. Once the sun was going down, I headed inside, testing out the old wood stove. It seemed to be immortal. It fired up with no problem and warmed the cabin. I sat near the fire, watching the flames and listening to it crackle as I thought about everything, my dad, this trip, life in general. But sometime later in the night, the crackles of the fire were suddenly accompanied by a similar sound. Cracks and crunching came from the front of the cabin. I turned my head and listened. I only managed to realize it wasn't a wild animal and was definitely a person just as they got up to the front door. The wood stove suddenly felt 1,000 times louder, preventing me from hearing intently whoever the hell was outside. Then they knocked and called out a name that made my whole world stop for a moment. The man called out my dad's name. I felt completely shocked, yet compelled to stand up and walk to the other side of the door. How did he know my dad? I couldn't resist calling out and asking who he was. The man outside hesitated. I think he knew after I spoke that I wasn't my dad. "I'm an old friend of the man who built this cabin. Was hoping I'd get to see him again." The unknown man spoke. I got a little closer to the door, feeling the urge to open it and talk to someone about my dad, to hear stories and everything. But still, something kept me from opening it. "Why are you even here?" I asked, and the man said he lived in that old town. After thinking for a second, I decided to share that I was the son of the man he was looking for, and my dad had passed away. The man behind the door paused. "I'm real sorry to hear that, kid. Wish I could have seen him one more time." Initially, it felt nice to hear, but I quickly sensed something was off about the way he said it. Something in his voice. It wasn't the sadness I was expecting from someone who just lost a friend. Before I could say anything, and almost like he knew I was thinking too hard about it, the man continued talking. "Why don't you open up and we can have a chat? It's real cold out here, son. Will be nice to share that fire." Although he talked slowly, I sensed an urgency or a lack of patience in his voice. Something in me felt he wasn't being truthful, that maybe he wasn't who he said he was. Sure, he knew my dad's name and was in the town he used to live in, but how did I know he was really a friend? Still, as I was thinking, I couldn't find the right words. In my pause, the man asked again for me to open up. He knocked on the door again, a little harsher. His voice grew less kind and more demanding. I took a few steps back from the door. "Kid, open the door. Are you going to let me die out here in the cold? Is that what your father would want from you?" My heart began to pound as I dug into my backpack for my hunting knife. The man continued hitting the door and yelling subtle threats, discarding the fake identity of being a kind, harmless friend. This went on for much longer than I could track. It felt like a continuous nightmare. But suddenly, the man punched the door in anger, and it was followed by the sound of his footsteps walking away, going back into the woods. I stayed up all night, mind racing, as I waited in fear. But when the sun came up, with no signs of him around, I hurriedly packed my bag and ran from the cabin. I got really lucky finding my car untouched, still well hidden behind the crumbling gas station. I fled the town and drove nonstop back home. I was hoping that trip would give me some answers or help me come to terms with everything, but honestly, I'm just left with more questions. I realized I never really knew why my dad moved away from there. I guess I assumed it was because the town was dying off, but now I think there was probably more to it, and maybe there were other reasons he never brought me back to his cabin. I don't know why that man was still around there, what he really wanted from me, or how he even knew my dad at all. But something tells me he didn't have any good intentions that night. Had I let my emotions get the better of me and opened the door, I genuinely don't think I ever would have made it out of that town.
Story 3. Anonymous. This was a while ago, in 2014, when I was taking a gap year from college to travel the U.S. out of my car. When I got to the East Coast, my cousin offered me to stay at his cabin just south of the Appalachian Mountains. I took the offer, knowing it'd be nice to have an actual place to stay and take a break for a few days. The cabin was nice, too. Honestly, it felt a lot more like a vacation home. Definitely a more modern cabin than the tiny log cabins you usually find in the middle of the forests. I was honestly sort of surprised my cousin let me stay there for free. I started moving a bunch of stuff from my car into the cabin. When I went back out to grab what was left, I noticed someone watching me. They were out in the tree line, standing far from the path. With nothing else in his view but me and the house, he had to be looking at me. Maybe they weren't trying to be creepy, though, and I didn't know the area. For all I knew, there could have been cabins and houses all around here, just past the trees and out of sight. I grabbed the rest of my things and locked my car. Bringing it all inside, I saw the man still out there facing the cabin as I closed the door. I sent a text to my cousin letting him know I got in okay, but also that someone was out there watching me. I just asked if he knew who it might have been. He texted me back while I was unpacking, but I forgot to check it until nearly an hour later.
well past when the sun had set. My cousin said the cabin was on 40 acres of his property with a fence around the whole area. Nobody else should have been out there. That immediately made me feel way worse about what I saw. Before, I hadn't cared that much, but now it was pretty strange that they were on the property just staring at me from afar. I went and looked outside again, but beyond the lights from the cabin, it was pitch black. I couldn't even see up to the tree line. It was just complete darkness all around. It gave me a chill as I closed the curtains. I tried to cool off by watching a movie and resting in the bedroom. The movie helped keep my mind occupied, but it didn't completely relieve the feeling. About an hour into it, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I looked, locking my eyes on the window, where there was a gap in the curtains. I thought I might have just seen something move over there, but now all I could see was my blurry reflection on the glass and only darkness behind it. I quickly got up and started walking toward it when there were suddenly footsteps sprinting through the grass. By the time I was looking out the window, I couldn't see anything and could only faintly hear the footsteps going further into the dark. I immediately called my cousin. I don't know why I didn't just go straight to calling the police, but my cousin told me to, so I hung up and had the cops on the way within a minute. For how far out the cabin was, the officer made it there in a decent amount of time. However, the guy who had been watching me was long gone, and we both quickly realized there wasn't much he could do about it. He couldn't search the woods or really do anything at all unless the guy showed up again and hung around long enough for the officer to come back. So, I was left alone again. I really couldn't shake the uneasy feeling for the entire rest of that night. I could have left, but honestly, the thought of bringing all my stuff out to the car, going back and forth from the cabin in the middle of the dark was more unsettling than just hunkering down inside. Of course, I couldn't help but look out the windows over and over, even though I couldn't see anything at all. For the last hour before bed, it must have been 12 or 1 a.m., I was just pacing the house, double-checking everything and trying to feel safer about going to sleep. I think I was just pushing it off as much as I could, but it was inevitable. I had to rest. I turned off all the lights in the cabin, headed to the bedroom, and locked myself in. I hoped the worst was behind me and got in bed, falling asleep 30 minutes later. I woke up early, like very early, way too early for it to be right. The sun wasn't even up yet, so it had to be around 4 a.m., which meant I'd only slept for a few hours. Almost immediately, my mind went back into that panic state, feeling the need to check around the cabin again. There would be no way I could go back to sleep without walking around first to make sure I was still okay. I got up and turned on the hallway light, then just listened for a second. I didn't hear anything but the heavy wind hitting the thin windows throughout the cabin. I started walking, but only got halfway down before hearing something else. It sounded like a couple of thumps on the end of the cabin. I knew there was a small library room there,